to the Minister of Housing. Does he agree with Chris Bishop, National Spokesperson for Housing, statement on the 27th of September 2002 that, quote, "We will build enough state and social houses so that there is no social housing waitlist," end quote? If so, is the government on track to eliminate the social housing waitlist?
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
Mr Speaker, yes, I often agree with myself. The goal of any government, as indeed it is this government, should be to reduce the social housing waitlist as much as possible. One way to reduce the waitlist is to build more state and social houses. That's why in Budget 2024 we allocated $140 million to fund 1,500 new places to June 2027. Kāinga Ora will also be building or delivering an additional 2,650 housing places to June 2026. There are also many other ways to reduce the housing waitlist, including increasing land supply, making it easier for councils to fund and finance infrastructure, reducing consenting costs, increasing housing supply, increasing competition in the market for building materials, and removing red tape. Around half of the applicants on the social housing waitlist, listen up because I don't think members know this, around half of the applicants on the waitlist are living in private housing. So anything we can do to make rents or housing more affordable puts downward pressure on the waitlist. In response to the second part of the question, we are on track. Since we came to government, the social housing waitlist has declined by around 5,000 households. This is great progress. If it was the case that simply handing billions of dollars to Kāinga Ora was a way to reduce the waitlist, we would have seen better results over the last 6 years. Despite record debt by Kāinga Ora and billions of dollars given to the organisation, the social housing waitlist quadrupled.
Supplementary.
Supplementary, Honourable Kerry McAnulty.
Does he consider stopping the expansion of the state housing stock and reducing funding to community housing providers to only 750 social houses a year to be in line with the pledge to, quote, "build enough state and social houses so there is no social housing waitlist," end quote?
Well, Mr Speaker, the member's question is completely factually inaccurate. We have funded more social houses than the last government did. For example, the Kāinga Ora and social housing build program stopped as per the settings left by the last government's budget in May 2023. There were no social housing places funded beyond June 2025. It was a fiscal cliff bequeathed to us by the last government. So the member's assertion that we have reduced social housing funding is in fact completely inaccurate. The truth is the opposite. We have increased it.
Supplementary.
One more here, sorry. Honourable Kerry McAnulty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Outside of Kāinga Ora and community housing providers, how many social houses have the private sector built over the last 10 years?
Well, as the member knows, the private sector does not typically build social houses. Well, of course, building houses and improving the affordability of housing is part of the answer. The members need to understand the way the housing market works, which is that when rents are high and people can't afford the private rental market, they end up in social housing. So all of the things the government is doing around freeing up land and making it easier for builders to build will help our housing market at every section, from first home buyers, from people moving houses, from people in social housing, and people who might otherwise need a social house. We are focused on using every lever at our disposal in the housing market to improve affordability. Part of that is supporting Kāinga Ora and the community housing sector to build more social and affordable houses. Very important.
The Honourable Nicola.
Has the number of New Zealanders waiting on the State House waiting list increased or decreased since the government was elected? And how does that compare to what happened to the State House waiting list under the last government?
Well, Mr Speaker.
Sorry, that's just too much.
Simple.
No, sorry, calm it down. I'm going to have to do something because otherwise I'm going to upset myself if I don't.
Simple numbers, Mr. Speaker. The wait list increased under the last government.
Hang on. We'll just go into complete silence and then we'll see where it goes from there. Away you go.
Simple numbers, Mr. Speaker. The wait list has declined by around 5,000 since the government came to office. That compares to an increase of around 20,000 under the last government. Let me make this point, Mr. Speaker. 50% of people on the social housing wait list need a one-bedroom house. Kāinga stock, 10%, or 12% I should say, 12% of the houses owned by the government are one-bedroom units. We are really focused on gearing up the system to build simple, low-cost, affordable social houses for people in need.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Supplementary question. Could the Minister explain whether people in emergency housing has gone up or down since this new government was elected?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
Hang on, wait on.
one of the things...
Wait on.
Mr. Speaker, one of the things that this government is very proud of is that over the last 14 months or so, around 1,900 children, emergency housing motels have been moved into social and affordable housing. It's a totemic achievement, and the government is very proud of the fact that there are thousands of children now living in social houses who were previously living in cold, dark, dank motels. That is the legacy bequeathed to us by the outgoing government.
Supplementary.
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Does the Minister consider that the State House waiting list would be longer or shorter if 100,000 Kiwi-built houses had been delivered?
No, that's... well, I think we'll leave that one. The Honourable Chair McAnulty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Is it his intention to reduce the social housing wait list not by building houses, but instead, as frontline providers have stated is the actual case with emergency housing numbers, by manipulating the numbers?
No, that's not the intention. We will build more social houses. Tell you one thing we have done is really try to get to grips with the way in which the register interacts with people who are actually building the houses. To give the House a simple example, when we came into government, the way in which MSD's list was communicated to Kāinga and the community housing providers, they basically had to provide people one by one to the community housing providers. Incredibly inefficient, time-consuming process that sucked up enormous amounts of energy. There have been a whole bunch of operational improvements to the way the register operates so that it's easier for people on the register to communicate, or easier for MSD to communicate with Kāinga and the community housing providers. Simple operational things like that have made a difference in the operation and housing people off the register.
Supplementary. Does he agree with Andrew Crisp, Chief Executive of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, who said that, quote, both the register and people that apply does not represent effectively severe housing deprivation, end quote, and if so, how can he stand in this House and celebrate numbers going down when he knows from frontline providers and his own ministry the need is actually growing?
Two points. Firstly, he's not the minister. He's not the chief executive. He's left. Secondly, he is right. The register is imperfect, and I think members opposite who've been ministers of housing before would acknowledge that. The register is an imperfect measure of housing need. There's no doubt about that. There are people in housing need who aren't on the register. And it's quite possibly the case that there are people on the register who haven't been checked up on in the last few months or years who don't necessarily need to be on the register, for example. So, in fact, the last government commissioned a report by DPMC into the social housing register and the way in which it operates. It was done by Grant Robertson's implementation unit. The report is available online. I encourage the member to go and read it because it's a pretty sorry tale of how the register operates. So I'm not pretending that it's a perfect measure of housing need, but it's what we have, and it's what we have now, and we're comparing who's on the register now in the same way that the last government did, and we'll continue to do that.
Supplementary.
Yep.
Can he assure the House that no Kāinga houses or land will be sold to any donors to either of the three government parties?
I don't think that's a reasonable question. It's not a reasonable question for the Minister to answer. That would imply that the Minister is aware of how other parties are funded. It's not a reasonable question, nor is it in the bounds of ministerial responsibility.